Chapter 11. Much to Roxy's relief, Tag had gone inside as soon as they pulled up to the ranch house. He'd hummed as he opened the door for her truck, closing his eyes for a second and nodding to some unheard beat before he hurried toward the house. He hadn't even remembered to tell her goodbye or say anything else for that matter. She recognized that obsessive drive to get the music down on paper. She remembered the times she wouldn't hear from him for hours, how he would ignore texts and calls even when they'd already had plans. Then the relief fled as she drove back toward her house and couldn't get him off her mind. The way he'd stood so close to her and the way his voice, his music, him, could still wind inside her soul and settle there. How all of that had happened and he hadn't done a thing except stand too close for a few seconds. Yet here she was, running again, going too fast down the lane between the ranch house and her home, like she couldn't flee the fear fast enough. She hit the brakes and made a reckless U-turn on the dirt road, dipping her truck down into the ditch on one side as she came around. She parked in the back of the ranch house and hopped out, heading inside in search of Bellamy. She couldn't remember Nash making her inside scorch the way Tag just had, but that was probably because they were settled now, comfortable with each other, an easy kind of electricity between them. Bellamy could help her remember that and help her turn on a fire hose to the heat raging through her even now just thinking about how close Tag had stood. When Roxy peered around the mudroom door to the dining area, Tag's crew sat around enjoying hamburgers and Bellamy's homemade fries, but Tag was noticeably absent. Thankfully, the last thing she needed right now was more muddied feelings and Tag resuming his sneaky campaign to convince her that they were meant to be together. As she stopped and listened, behind the conversation, she could hear faint guitar sounds from upstairs, explaining where he was. "Looking for someone?" Bellamy asked, appearing in the doorway of the kitchen. Roxy's mother had always preferred to have the kitchen, dining, and living room open so their family could enjoy time together at mealtimes. But when they'd converted the house, Roxy had made some adjustments to the kitchen and dining area to wall the kitchen off from the guests. The dining and living room still remained open, keeping that family-like atmosphere. Roxy crossed the hallway and pushed Bellamy back into the kitchen, which it looked like she'd just been cleaning up after cooking. "First of all, just because we're supposed to keep a low staff doesn't mean you need to do everything." Roxy shut the kitchen door behind her and spun on her friend. "Call Cassie in the morning and tell her to get out here to help with mealtimes. You don't have time for this." Bellamy folded her arms across her chest and leaned against the large island in the middle of the kitchen. "Okay, boss, what's the second of all?" Roxy took a stool and sat down at the island, leaning forward to stare at her friend seriously. "When I first started dating Nash, the first time I kissed him, what did I say to you?" Bellamy studied Roxy with confusion for several seconds, maybe waiting for Roxy to go on, and then took a deep breath when she didn't. "That it was really nice, that you liked it." Roxy swallowed. "I said that. I said nice, that I liked it. Did that make you suspicious in any way?" Bellamy unfolded her arms and put her hands on her hips. "What's going on, Rox?" Roxy could only moan in despair for a moment. It was worse than she thought. She had hoped that maybe that moment with Tag had somehow scrambled her memories or made her forget that when she and Nash first started going out, she'd felt the same electricity. "Roxy?" She put her head in her hands and leaned over the island. "Today, right before we went on the hike, Tag got in my personal space. Rox, just because he's famous and we signed all that stuff doesn't mean that he can—" Roxy held up a hand and raised her head. "And I thought I was on fire, Bellamy. I wanted him to hold me like he had in Laramie. I couldn't think about anything but kissing him for a good 15 seconds, even though the other half of me was screaming to save myself. It was everything I'd forgotten existed when you need someone, because I haven't had that with Nash, and I didn't even realize it." Bellamy's mouth dropped open and she swore. "Girl, I know." "Nice," Bellamy repeated and cringed. "Yes, maybe I should have been suspicious, but in my defense, I didn't know you as well in your Tag days. What are you going to do? You have to break up with Nash." Roxy clenched her jaw. "I can't let Tag come in here and do this to me again. Fire might be nice and all, but people get burned, and I can't throw myself at him over something like this, expecting it to actually be real." Bellamy came forward and pulled Roxy's hand into hers, her expression getting soft. "I heard him singing right before I brought him his dinner, something like, 'I'm going to wake up with you every day. I'm going to count my blessings when I see your sweet face.'" Bellamy sang in a soft voice. I stood there and let his fries get cold because it was so, so sweet. Like one of those songs you hear that makes you want to find your someone right now. "He has always done that. I'm his muse," he says, "but that doesn't mean anything." Roxy sighed and slept back down to the table. "It means something." Roxy looked up at the meaning in Bellamy's voice, soft but a tone that dared Roxy to contradict her. I'll talk to Nash. I'll be honest, and we'll go on a break or something. But when Tag is gone, things will settle down and I can work things out with Nash. I'm sure of it. She stood back up and clenched her fists together. It seemed like Tag could make her love him again just by showing up, but that didn't mean it would last. Nash's Jeep was parked in front of the house when Roxy headed back. She slowed her truck. Bellamy was right. Not being able to get Tag off her mind wasn't fair to Nash. I still have feelings for him, she practiced in her head. She hated the sound of that on her tongue. Maybe those feelings were there, but she didn't want them to be. She didn't want to wonder what would happen when Tag went back to Nashville in his superstar life. 2 declarations of love on either end of 8 years didn't equal happily ever after. When she came into her kitchen from the garage, Nash turned from where he set out plates on her dining room table. He laid down the forks and came toward her, his expression apologetic. "What's up?" she asked, hoping she sounded calm and not like Tag had let loose a bunch of fire ants in her stomach. She would tell Nash that they should take a break, but she didn't want to ruin the future by going into it too much. "I brought dinner." He wrapped her up in a tight hug and then pulled back to look at her. The fire ants scattered, thankfully. "I'm sorry about the way I said stuff this afternoon, that I made you feel like you had to spend the afternoon with Tag to prove he was just another guest or a friend and nothing more." She swallowed. Nash had nothing to apologize for. "It's okay. I've missed hiking some of those trails." Nash flinched, and it wasn't until she thought back on what she'd said that she realized she'd basically admitted to not hiking those trails in the years since Tag had left. She let the inference go. Trying to explain would only make things worse. Her love for Tag, even if she had thought it was just friendship back then, hadn't been just as big as those mountains. It had been in those mountains, and every place they'd walked together, every song that came from those moments. Nash leaned his forehead down onto hers. "I can't imagine having to spend the afternoon with Addie, and how awkward that would be, and I'm not even mad at her about the things that happened between us." He closed the distance and kissed Roxy, and it was several moments later that Roxy realized that while the fire ants had left, nothing had replaced them, just as she'd feared. As she kissed Nash, nothing drove her to pull herself closer, closer, closer to him, the way her feet had begged her to step forward and put herself in Tag's arms. Nash was a good kisser, and she'd always enjoyed kissing him, but could she say that it was electric? Had it ever been? "We need to talk," she murmured when he pulled away. The fire ants had returned, crawling up through her stomach and spreading over her chest, squeezing the life out of her. His eyebrows squished together. "About the hike today? Tag?" She nodded and stepped back. Surely something had sparked between her and Nash to bring them together. She thought back to their early days of dating over 6 months ago. It had been exciting and fun. They'd easily become friends, and then more after a few weeks. She liked talking to him, spending time with him, and he fit in with her long-term goals, stay in Little River forever. They hadn't spoken about the future specifically yet, but the transition would be an easy one. She knew it. "What's wrong?" He stepped away from the table where she noticed styrofoam takeout boxes from the taco truck that came to town twice a week. He followed her into the living room, perching on the edge of the couch and waiting for her to sit down next to him. When she did, he put his arm over the top of the couch, his eyes pinched with worry. "I need to be very honest with you about us, about Tag." Nash grimaced and reached one hand to take hers. "I overreacted. Having him come back to town, knowing there was some history, knowing that he meant to try and win you back, got into my head. Obviously, with him trying stuff, you'd want to avoid him, and that doesn't have to mean anything." She shook her head and pulled her hand away. "It's not that. Something's wrong with us, Nash. I'm not sure how I missed it." He narrowed his eyes in suspicion as he studied her. "What do you mean?" It wasn't a surprise that he had probably guessed how much of this had to do with Tag, with the way he made her feel. Maybe Nash felt like he'd overreacted, but at least he saw what the signs had meant. The way she wouldn't let any piece of Tag into her life at all could only mean she was afraid of what would happen if she did. Heat rushed into her cheeks as she remembered that brief moment at the trailhead, then others, the way her fingers had brushed his shirt when they had argued the night he came back to Little River. It had startled her how much she wanted to grip his shirt and lean against him again, but she'd foolishly dismissed it, not caring to peer too deep into what it might mean, to pretend like he hadn't ignored her for 8 years or that he hadn't ruined everything by asking her to do the impossible and then leaving her when she said no. She turned to Nash, though, grasping at some kind of straw that maybe Tag had just muddied up her brain, and if she got out of here for a while, ignored him some more, things would fall back into place with Nash. "When you kiss me, when we're together, when we're apart, what do you feel?" Now she took his hand in hers, weaving their fingers together so maybe she could demonstrate how there wasn't the emotion that there should be. His head snapped back in surprise, proving he'd expected her to admit to her feelings for Tag. "I want to be with you, of course." Like in a so distracting way that you can't really work, that I'm on your mind all the time? Like you rush out here after work because you can't wait another second?" she pressed. He chewed on his lip as he listened, maybe the truth dawning on him for the first time too. That's a first dating sort of thing. But his tone held the questioning that Roxy had done herself since talking to Bellamy, the hope that she was wrong. "Did you feel it then?" she asked. He stared at her. "Don't you want the kind of love where you still feel that way?" He drew in a breath and pulled away from her, scooting to the arm of the couch. "But this is about Tag, about how you feel about him." "Maybe," she admitted. "So hopefully when he's gone I can figure out my life better, but I had to tell you." She rubbed her fingers over the microfiber on her couch, avoiding looking back up at Nash. Accusation flowed through his voice, maybe not totally directed at her, but enough. "He grew up here too, with you. He is always going to be a part of your life," Nash said. She looked up in time to see him run a hand through his hair and stand up. She shook her head. "This is the first time in 8 years Tag has come home. He told me a long time ago that he wasn't going to stay in Little River, and that's never changed." She grimaced at Nash, biting her lip. "I'm sorry." "What does all this mean? I don't feel like you're about to run off with Tag, so you don't need my blessing for that." Nash spread out his hands, confusion evident in his expression. "It means that we need to take a break until I can understand if Tag is what's wrong right now or if there's something else I need to fix this." She waved her fingers between them. "I'm sorry," she said again for good measure. After several silent moments, Nash came forward, leaning over to kiss her cheek. "I think we have something good, Rox, but I'll trust you here." He didn't wait for her to respond before he left the house.